Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Karen Hughes White, and on behalf of the Board of Directors, officers, members, I welcome you to the final program in this series funded by the Path Foundation, sharing local history and genealogy via AAHA to the neighborhood. These programs commenced during a time in which many were restricting their outreach and visitation due to COVID. We have witnessed the effects of COVID. We have seen them in our communities, affecting our loved ones, and yet we remain so appreciative to the Path Foundation for affording AAHA the opportunity to welcome visitors, historians, authors, genealogists, artists, illustrators, and even veterans during this difficult time. AAHA remains open on Tuesdays and Wednesdays from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. We also, on occasion, set up appointments off hours. These are for research, for museum tours, and even family gatherings. AAHA works to preserve and document the people of African descent in Fauquier County and to know their names. Typically, this time of the year, AAHA staff and officers would be planning an annual program marking the anniversary of AAHA opening to the public, which started June 14th, 1997. But this year, we will celebrate our anniversary by participating at the annual Juneteenth celebration scheduled for June 17th in the town of Warrenton, which will take place between 11 a.m. and 8 p.m. We will be stationed at the John Barton Payne Building. So we are asking everyone to please mark your calendars, visit the website, FaukierJuneteenth.com, and celebrate that particular event. I am truly, truly humbled to be able to introduce our guest speaker today. Now, realizing that March is Women's History Month, I take great pride in doing this because our special guest today is a virtuous woman with a kind spirit with many talents. Christine Taylor Lewis, a native of the community of Hayti and a graduate of William C. Taylor High School, happened to leave Fauquier and venture elsewhere. I'm not going to give a long, detailed introduction of Christine because I would like for her to be able to tell you a little bit about herself personally. I will, however, mention that she is married to Philip Lewis from the community of Asheville, the pastor of the Mount Pisgah Baptist Church in Upperville. Christine has served AAHA as a volunteer and as our outreach coordinator. She has served as our program coordinator and host for local history and genealogy and kept us fully inundated with Facebook posts. We are delighted to present to you Christine Taylor Lewis. Hello, Christine.
Hello, Karen. Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction. I feel humbled myself.
Oh, dear. You have brought to us so many interesting areas of expertise, but I want to know a little bit more about how you became interested in genealogy. What sparked your interest?
Well, I'm from a large family on both sides, both my mother's side and my father's side, but I never really knew my paternal grandfather or much about him. So in September 2006, around the 30th anniversary of my mother's passing, I joined Ancestry.com and set out to find out where my grandfather was or find out about his people. All I knew was that he was from Baltimore at the time. And it took 6 years, but I got hooked in the process as I began to discover things about other ancestors and relatives. But that's truly what sparked my interest. trying to find my Jones family.
Now, you mentioned utilizing Ancestry. Was it other types of resources used or just basically Ancestry?
Well, I started out with Ancestry, where I got birth certificates and vital information about people. But I also searched here at AAHA, and where I got a lot of court records and unique documents about African Americans. And I visited the Warrenton libraries for Genealogy, which is a wonderful resource. There I saw a lot of the old folklore Democrats. I got some information there. And I searched on the Prince William County Library online. And later I learned about the Library of Virginia's Chancery reports or records. Their index, where I found numerous records and depositions related to some of my ancestors who were enslaved here in Fauquier County. So that was an extremely great resource. Likewise, as I mentioned earlier, the court records and talking to the elderly. I talked to some of the people who grew up in Hayti and knew family members in Hayti and Oliver City, where my folks were from. So they were very resourceful as well.
Okay. So starting up, if someone is on here that has not started to do their genealogy or to really explore their family history, what advice would you give to them?
Okay, basically I would ask them to find a good genealogy search and suggest to start with Ancestry.com. That's probably the largest source, but there are others that they might visit online. Some are free. And the main piece of information that I think I would want to offer is to have a high value for accuracy. When you build your family tree, just to be sure to be able to verify your findings. And whenever you use vital events such as births and marriages, deaths, just be sure to have evidence to support it. And if you're recording oral history, I think it would be a good idea to name the persons from whom you got your information so that they might become consulted or contacted later. And it's not good to rely on information shared by others without being able to document it. And never, ever guess information. Sometimes unclear or certain information can become damaging or hurtful. So be very careful in that way. And the other thing would be to talk to your elders, whether they are family members or not. There's no telling what kind of information you could find from people in your community who knew your family. And if the elderly are reluctant, don't give up, but just be gentle. And in time, my experience has been that they will open up. And finally, never give up searching. Even if you get stuck, sometimes information will just come right out of the blue. And that has happened to me on occasion. So primarily, try to be accurate, seek your elders, and don't give up.
That is excellent advice, Christine. I agree with you so much, especially with visiting community members, because finding people that know is the key and that are willing to share.
That's right.
How far have you been able to trace your own ancestry on both sides?
Well, actually, on both sides, on my maternal and paternal side, I have documentation that goes back to the late 1700s.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Now, were your ancestors free before emancipation?
Well, yes.
Okay.
On my mother's side, my fourth great-grandfather, Louis Hicks Bourne of Calvert County, Maryland, was listed as a farmer in the 1860 census. and his race was listed as mulatto, so he was a free person. There are 2 Ben Corums listed in our registry of Negroes in Fauquier County that may or may not be my ancestors, but I have a Ben Corum in my family line who I know was enslaved. But my thinking is that the 2 Ben Corums in the registry could very well have some of the same ancestors as this Ben Corum that might go back to, say, the 1600s perhaps. But I know for sure about my ancestor in New Orleans.
Wow, that is really, really interesting. Do you know the names of the landholders or the properties in which your ancestors were enslaved or where they lived?
Okay.
You mentioned Ben Corum
Yes,
as being enslaved.
yes. Ben Corum was enslaved at the Blackwell farm in Midland by Elizabeth Blackwell before she emancipated her slaves during her will, when she wrote her will. Also, Celia Taylor on my father's side, Ben Corum's on my mother's side, was enslaved on that farm. And records show that a landowner by the name of Samuel Fox of Spotsylvania County also was a landholder in Fauquier County, at least by 1777. So Celia Taylor and Ben Corum would have been enslaved by Elizabeth Blackwell and by Samuel Fox.
Wow.
Both of Fauquier.
Mhm. And you are truly a Fauquier daughter, Christine.
Thank you. These things I remember.
Yeah.
Well, one thing my notes tell me that in 1685, William Fitzhugh of England purchased a land grant called Ravensworth that amounted to about 24,000 acres and covered 37.7 miles in what was then Fairfax County. And by the time he died in 1701, he owned about 55,000 acres, which he passed on to his 5 sons. And among his descendants was Giles Fitzhugh, who was born in 1773 and inherited about 484 acres near Warrenton. And today, a portion of that property is called the Western Farmstead, and it's a farm museum. Now, although I don't personally possess the documentation at this time, I'm pretty sure that many of my Fitzhugh ancestors were enslaved by the descendants of William Fitzhugh and possibly Giles.
Now that's interesting, Christine, because many years ago, with the national chapter of the Afro-American Historical and Genealogical Society, I did meet a lady who was researching Giles Fitzhugh, who said that her family had been emancipated by Giles Fitzhugh, and she believed that they were in Fauquier County or near Fauquier County. So that bears a little more research on our end to see what we can come up with. But I'm sure you're absolutely right on that, especially with the location of Weston and the Fitzhugh family that we know here today.
That's right. Thank you.
So growing up, I introduced you as being from the community of Hayti. Did you grow up knowing other community areas in which your family lived, or were most of your family members there, or where, Christine?
Well, my mother was born and grew up in Hayti, and there were many other relatives in Hayti where I grew up. My grandmother lived with us. My great-grandmother lived across the street, along with my aunts and uncles, great aunts and uncles. I had relatives all along Hayti. and in some other areas of Warrenton, some of the other communities. I had my father's grew up in Oliver City, which is another African-American community in Warrenton. And I have numerous relatives there. Most of my father's relatives live there, and most of my mother's relatives live in Hayti. But it is interesting to note that some of my grandparents on the Fitzhugh side did live in Hayti.
Okay.
They were in Hayti in the very early 1800s. I'm sorry, the very 1900s.
1900s.
Yes.
Wow. So, so today, is your family dispersed? Are they still in the community?
Well, at this point, we are dispersed. Some of my last relatives who were tailors left the community probably about 4 or 5 years ago. And they lived in Hayti for many, many years. And then I have a family who live in Frytown or Tall Timbers, which is very close to Oliver City. It's an extension of Oliver City, who live there. But from what I understand, all of our immediate family members have left both Hayti and Oliver City.
Was this a gradual leaving of the area, or was it any particular time frame? Or do you recall?
Well, as a matter of fact, most of my relatives lived in Hayti or Oliver City for many, many generations. And then when the era of civil rights came, and when people of my generation began to migrate to other places, some of my relatives left the area, and others who remained within time died off, if you will.
Okay.
And that's how they left the community.
So most of your family that they were here early on and then they left during civil rights era. That is extremely interesting, because I am finding people all over the United States that have
Yes.
Virginia and especially Fauquier County roots. And it's really rewarding to know of the richness of these people, the abilities that they had, because I know in doing the vast amount of research, they had to overcome many obstacles, including attending school in the midst of hardships, so to say. Now, for you, I know that I introduced you as being a graduate of Taylor High School, but I'm sure you just you weren't born and jumped from one grade all the way over to high school. So what about your early years, Christine?
Well, I started out at Rosenwald Elementary in Warrenton, in Madison Town community. In first grade in 1954, a segregated school, but that year when the schools were to be desegregated. But anyway, I started in 1954 and graduated from the 7th grade in 1961 and went on to Taylor High, where I graduated in 1966. From Taylor High, I remained at home for a year, worked around Warrenton. Then I was invited by a very dear friend who was a year ahead of me in high school, who lived in Ann Arbor, Michigan. She invited me to Michigan, and there I moved in 1967 and started my profession and my earlier years in Ann Arbor and then Detroit, Michigan. So, and as you were talking earlier about family members leaving the area, there were quite a few of our family, both sides, particularly on the Taylor side, who moved, and Fitzhughs, who moved to the Washington, D.C. area. And some people moved to Baltimore. So when I was a girl, there were occasions to go visit family members in D.C. or Baltimore. And the Baltimore and D.C. relatives came to Hayti very often, especially to visit with my uncle, my paternal uncle, who lived just across the street from me. So.
What about family gatherings today? Do you participate in homecomings or family reunions or anything like that as a whole? Or within a community or church?
Yeah, well, actually, I will explain a little later how two branches of my family came to a reunion that was established when I first met them.
Okay.
There was a
okay.
branch in Baltimore, but both of them were from Baltimore on both sides of my family. And on my father's side, we have been having annual family gatherings from 2015 on to 2020 when COVID began. That's when we started. We had annual gatherings then. And before then, from time to time, the family would gather with other members, say sometimes the Fitchies or sometimes the Bunburys or the Lees or other members of our family would have gatherings, which I would attend.
Okay.
But the big reunions have been done the last 5 years before COVID began.
Well, I really want you to tell me more about who's in your Taylor and Jones family lines, but I want to know, were there any surprises when you were doing this research? And you can do it however you would like, Christine. I love surprises. They always fascinate me.
Well, there were three extraordinary surprises, I'd say. In 2007, Ancestry.com sent me an email that led to a full branch of relatives on my father's side in Baltimore that I had not known about or any of my family. And as I checked with some of my Taylor and Fitzhugh family members, they hadn't heard of them either. And what happened was my great-grandfather, David Fitzhugh, had a brother whose name was Emmanuel, but none of us in my generation knew of him. And Emmanuel had a daughter who moved to Baltimore when she was a teenager and established a family there. And that's the branch that I came into contact with from Baltimore on my father's side. Then another goodie, in 2012, Ancestry sent me an email that led to a full branch of relatives on my mother's side who knew nothing about us. And what happened was I had been searching for my grandfather, my mother's father, and I came across this family in Baltimore, and I saw my grandfather's name and recognized it. But when he was born in 1904, so I saw it in the 1910 census. And then when I went to the 1920s, I didn't see that name, but I still saw the family. And then by the time I got to the 30s and the 40s, then I didn't see the parents. So I kind of put that aside because I was thinking maybe that wasn't the family that I thought it was. And lo and behold, when Ancestry got in contact with me, I came to meet Tiffany Green and her father, Terrence. And Terrence's grandmother was the sister of my grandfather, Howard Jones, excuse me. So that's how this family connected. And the Jones family didn't know that we existed. Actually, my grandfather loved horses. And when he was a boy, he ran away from home to follow the horses. And he made a very successful career as a horseman, as a groomer and a trainer, and traveled all over. And somehow he made his way to Virginia, and he met my grandmother and married her, and they started a family. And he wanted my grandmother to move back to Baltimore. This is what I found out later from my auntie before she passed, my Aunt Callie, that he did want her to move back to Baltimore, but she didn't. But anyway, he decided to continue his pursuit of the horses, and we hadn't heard from him. And apparently he hadn't kept in great contact with his family in Baltimore. So they didn't know about us and we didn't know about them. And we had a grand reunion in 2015 and have gathered again every year for the next 5 years until COVID came. And this year, I turned the baton and passed it on to my niece, two of my nieces and one of my cousins in the next generation. And we're going to continue these reunions then.
That is wonderful.
Yes. So that's the story. And then the third surprise was that through AAHA research, I learned that I had descendants on both my father's side and my mother's side who were enslaved at the Elizabeth Blackwell farm in Midland. That was a surprise. I wasn't surprised about one family, the family on my mother's side, but my father's side it was, and opened up doors to a lot of information about the Taylor family that I didn't know.
That is wonderful. I am so delighted to hear that.
So what I have is a video story that I put together. And what I'm going to do is share the screen and go through the story with you.
Okay, great.
Is that okay?
Yes.
Yeah. I trust that I'll do this. Bear with me. There we go. So this first slide, we have a feature reference.
Okay, I'm not seeing your screen.
Oh. Can you come on this?
Let me check. Okay, there's Troy.
Should be working?
Yes.
All right,
Thank you.
no problem.
Thank you very much. Okay, so this first slide shows the feature reference, which is the story of Ravensworth. And that is where I found the information and the excellent resource of information about the Fitchews, beginning with William Fitchew when he came to Virginia. And it lists all of his sons who were descendants of his property. And apparently they were a very huge and wealthy empire. And this book is just an excellent source. In it, I learned that there was a David Fitzhugh and a Davy Fitzhugh. And Dave is very familiar to me, who were freed by one of the Fitzhugh's sons in the 1830s. But I'm still trying to make that connection to Fauquier County with that direct line. And so that would be an excellent source for any of my family who are looking for information about the Fitzhugh relatives and where they might have been located. Also, in the middle is my reference to how I gained information about the those who were enslaved at the Blackwell farm. This is something I put together about the Library of Virginia Chancery Records to show that if you Google Virginia Memory Chancery and then select Chancery Records Index, you'll come up with this screen where you can choose the county or the city, the plaintiff's names, the defendants, you can use surnames, and then there's a reference where you can ask for enslaved persons or freed persons. And there are index numbers and local case file numbers that you can also cross-reference. But this, the Chancery files, it just opened up a brand new door to me about those who were enslaved. And I found that through a deposition that was in one of the cases, which was Washington et al. Versus Elizabeth Blackwell's estate and others. Stephanie Addison Mudd talked quite a bit about that Chancery claim when she was with us earlier this year. So that's another excellent resource for those who are looking for those who are enslaved in our family. And also there's the Fauquier County, Virginia Register of Free Negroes from 1817 to 1865, which was put together and collaborated with yourself and the Afro-American Historical Association. Now I'm going to introduce my family and give a little story or photo story. So here are my parents. Horace David Taylor Sr. He was born in 1920 and died in 1967. He was born in Oliver City. And he was the son of Joseph and Rosa Taylor. And of course, this is my mother, Christine Virginia Jones. She was born in Hayti to Louise Jones and Howard Jones. And she was born in 1926. And she passed in 1976. Here you have the Taylor children, my baby sister Pamela on the left, the oldest child, Rosetta, my second oldest brother, my oldest brother, Horace, myself, and my next oldest brother, Robert Douglas. We also had a brother whose name was Ronald Charles, and he passed away. He was born in 1945 and he passed away in 1976. And he is buried in the Warrenton Cemetery, just at the head of my mother's grave, and what they call the colored section of the old section of the Warrenton Cemetery. Next, we have my paternal grandparents. We have Joseph Melvin Taylor, my father's father. He was born in 1893. He passed in 1963. And the picture in the center is my granddaddy and my grandmother, Rosa. Rosa is Rosa Fitzhugh Taylor. And she was born in 1889 and died in 1963. And it was said, Grandma Rose passed first. And then Granddaddy Taylor passed about a month later, I think it was. And it was said that he died of a broken heart. That was the first time I heard that expression. And so they had 12 children. 2 of them survived past their first year. And they're all listed here with those who were survived. And those who were married, their spouses are listed on the right. And what's interesting about this is that my auntie, Rosa Edna, and my father were born the same year. She was born in January, and he was born in December on Christmas Day. And they both died the same year. Another interesting thing is that all 7 of the surviving Taylor sons served honorably in the United States Armed Services. Also, Herman Melvin, the oldest, and George Melvin died during the same year. And my auntie, Aunt Marion, told us that Herman Melvin took the name after her husband or his father, and he passed. So after Aunt Alice was born, and she became pregnant, then she had George Melvin, and he passed. So she said, well, no more Melvins. And then along came my Uncle Charles, who lived in California for many years. Because now we have my paternal great grandparents. First, we have Horace T. Taylor, who my oldest brother got his name from, and my father. And he was married to Jenny Green Taylor of Fort Care. I don't have a lot of information about her early years, but she was his wife. And then we have David Samuel Fitzhugh. He's my grandmother's father, and his wife, Fanny Carter Fitzhugh. And Fanny Carter Fitzhugh was born in Culpeper, and they resided in Warrenton. They lived in Hayti a while, and then they lived in Oliver City as well. And Horace T. Taylor, the father of my grandfather, Joseph Melvin, he was born enslaved at the Blackwell Farm in Midland in 1857 and emancipated by the will of Elizabeth Blackwell in 1859. In July of 1928, he died in Altoona, Pennsylvania. And at the time, his wife, Jenny Taylor, who was living in Warrenton, actually, she was living in Warrenton when he passed away in 1932. And I also, in my research, found that in the 1870 census, Horace Taylor was living in Warrenton. He was 3 years old and he was living with relatives. Now, on the census was listed Acelia Taylor, who was in her 80s or 90s. She was old enough to have been his grandmother or great-grandmother. And there was another child who was would have been one of his cousins. And these are those names I found in the Chancery report. So that's how I was able to make that connection. So between 1884 and 1910, he was on the Altoona, Pennsylvania City Directory. And he was living in Altoona and working as a waiter in what is now the historic Logan House, which was a railroad hotel, one of those hotels on the water. And he was a teamster. Somehow I'm losing my page. He was a teamster during the time that he was working at the Logan House. The 1990 census showed that his wife Jenny had moved back to Warrenton with their 2 children, one of whom was Joseph, my grandfather. And they were in Warrenton in 1900. And granddaddy, my great-grandfather Horace's obituary in the Altoona Mirror showed that he had been an assistant head waiter at the Logan House for many years. And his funeral, according to the obituary, was arranged by a group of friends of his who belonged to one of the lodges. I don't remember right off the top of my head which ones. They organized and performed his, arranged for his funeral service. And apparently, Grandma Jenny wasn't able to come, but she was recognized as his wife, and all of his children were recognized as well. So that was a good piece of information. I was able to connect with the Chancery report. Horace Taylor's name. So. Now, this is very interesting. This is Fanny Carter Fitzhugh, my grandmother's mother, my paternal great-grandmother. She gave birth to 23 children. 21 of them survived. And when I was doing the research last year on the midwives in Upperville County, based on the files that we have, that we do have here on file at AAHA, I came across this birth certificate. It says Walter R. Fitzhugh, and that's Uncle Big Tim. And sure enough, David is listed and Fanny. And then I saw that the midwife was Fanny Fitzhugh. So right away, I presumed that it was my great aunt, whose name also is Spanish. She was named after her mother. And so I ran to my resources to find out how old Aunt Fanny was when she helped to bring Uncle Walter, or Uncle Big Tip, as we call him, into this world. And she was 10 years old. So I'm thinking 10. And then after a while, it occurred to me that if Grandma gave birth to 23 children, and he would have been on 20, then by that time, if nobody else was around, even a 10-year-old child would have been able to assist her. And I also think about the history of our people, where some women who were enslaved and working in fields, gave birth alone. So I didn't think that too extraordinary that a 10-year-old would even assist. But then I also thought of the fact that maybe Aunt Fanny delivered Uncle Victor by herself. So the question remains, was he delivered by his 10-year-old sister or his mother? And I have yet to find that out. Maybe one day I will. But to me, it's an interesting story. Let's see where. Now, here's a picture, two pictures that those from my generation probably would love to see. On the left is Walter Fitzgerald, Uncle Big Tip, as we call him. He's with his daughter, Ada, and their son, Sammy. And Uncle Big Tip was a businessman around Warrenton. He also, at one point, operated the Cross Creek Caverns up in Amosville, where it was like a juke joint for those young folks who don't know. And that's where people went to dance and have a good time. So he operated that for a while. He also had a business called Hilltop in Warrenton, which he operated. Also, his brother Thomas operated the Hilltop for a while. Or maybe Uncle Big Tip operated the pool hall that was there. But he was down on what was 2nd Street at the time, or 5th Street then, and operated those. So, and I think he had some connections with people in the entertainment industry, certainly his son. Now his son, I'm having a vision problem over here. His son, Sammy Fitzhugh, was a local recording star in the 1950s and 1960s. And he was even on the Milk Grant Show. And the Milk Grant Show was a local dance show out of Washington. It was like our version of the American Bandstand. So, even around 4 or 5, whatever time it came on, that's what we would look at. But Sam was very, very popular. And of course, he would play up at Cross Creek and around different places. And this picture, I just want to thank my cousins, Uncle Big Tip's granddaughters, Tanya and Sharon, for supplying these pictures to me. I would never have seen this picture of Sammy had it not been for my cousin Sharon. So I thank them both. And this is when Sammy was singing at a place called Johnson's Farm in Manassas. And Johnson's Farm, Manassas at that time was still rural. I remember when Manassas wasn't much bigger than Gainesville. It's dark and stuff going there. But anyway, he played at Johnson's Farm in Manassas in this. And he had 2 hit records, 45s. One was on the Poplar record label called Sadie Mae, Sadie, Sadie, Sadie Mae. And then on the other side was one called Linda Baby. I don't quite remember the tune to that. And then on Atco, which to me is a real huge label, I think Otis Redding or some of them, were on that label. He had this song called Lover's Plea. And on the flip side was I Feel All Right. And they were very, very popular songs, both of them. So he was very much loved in the local area. And when I meet strangers, or when I meet people who have the Fitzhugh name, they say, Sammy Fitzhugh? You can Sammy Fitzhugh? And I say, yeah. Some even play him. So I'm real delighted to be able to show this image to those who remember Sammy. He retired from singing and then got a degree in nursing And I think did you work with them?
Yes,
Karen?
I did. We worked at Oak Springs at the nursing home together.
Good.
And I was quite fond of Sammy.
Oh, that's good to know. Yes, and he attended Mount Zion Baptist in Warrenton.
Yes, he did.
Yes.
And he had a beautiful, beautiful voice. And I don't
Yes.
know of many people that could outshine him on a stage.
Yeah.
I saw him a couple of times in Warrenton.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I understand. I didn't see him. I was a little young when he was, back in the 50s and 60s. I was kind of young and wasn't able to go to the places like Cross Creek then. But I understand he was like Little Richard on the stage.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right.
He was an excellent performer. So that's Sammy. And here I have a wonderful family tree that was put together by one of the relatives doing a family reunion of the features back in the 70s or back in the 80s. And it shows David and Fanny at the bottom and a list of the children beginning in order, beginning from the oldest going up to the youngest. And the male are on the left and females are on the right. And right up at the top, you'll see Uncle Walter, he's number 20. So you mentioned the family gatherings, and I mentioned the connection on Ancestry. Back in 2006, I think it was, I got a call from Ancestry, an email, and they asked if, they said that there was someone who was interested in my great-grandfather, David Fitzhugh. And they asked if I would like to make contact with them, and I said, sure. Well, the person that I contacted is named Roblyn Scribner Ruffin, and she is the great-granddaughter of Emmanuel Fitzhugh, who is the brother of my great-grandfather, David. And apparently, Emmanuel had a daughter. He lived in Warrenton for a while, and I lost contact with where he was by the time he died. But he had a daughter in Warrenton whose name was Rebecca Adams Fitzhugh. And Rebecca left the area when she was a young girl, probably a teenager. But she was very young, and she moved to Baltimore. And in Baltimore, she raised a family of 7 children. And many of them migrated, or some of them who weren't in the Baltimore, DC area, went to Pennsylvania. So when Roblyn and I made contact, we decided that we should bring the families together since they had known each other. And we established a family reunion at Crockett Park in Midland on July 26, 2008. And Roblyn, contacted all of her relatives that she could who lived in Pennsylvania and Baltimore area. And I contacted the descendants of David who lived in the Virginia and DC area. And we all came together down at Crockett Park. And this is an image of Emmanuel's daughter, Rebecca, who was a deacon in her church and very, very well-loved and active in her church community, very highly respected. But another interesting piece is that she told her children that she wouldn't talk much about growing up in Warrenton, but we think she might have had some bad experience, but she would not talk about it. But she did come back to Warrenton one time and visited one of her cousins. And that was Walter Big Tip Fitzhugh. And she said he was a wonderful person and she had a wonderful visit with him. I think she took another relative. But that was a very, very interesting, fun story to tell. And now we come to my maternal grandparents, William Howard Jones, and Louise Virginia May Barry Jones Stradling. And Howard and Louise were married in December 1925. And my mother was born the following June. And when she and Howard separated for those years, apparently a divorce happened. And she married a man by the name of Harold Stradling. And she married a woman named Anaya. I think it was Anaya Hill. And I didn't know Anaya and I didn't know Harold, but from what I understand about relatives, they probably have these similar images. For some reason, I'm thinking that Harold Stradling is just kind of, cool kind of guy. But those are my maternal grandparents on my mother's side. And here we have the 4 Jones children, my mother on the left, and the picture in the center of her 3 brothers. We have Robert Mitchell Jones, who was married to Audrey Thompson of Remington. And then we have Chester Lee Jones, who was married to Doris Penn, and she still is with us. Uncle Chess and Uncle Bob and Aunt Audrey are now deceased. Uncle Lawrence is with us also. He lives down in your neck of the woods.
Yes,
Yes, and is a member of your church now.
yes, he is.
And he was married to Gladys Ford of Turnbull. And those are my mother's brothers. And here we have the story of Onion, the horse that beat Secretariat after the Triple Crown. And the photo shows my grandfather, Howard Jones. He's holding the reins of Onion, number 4, in the winner's circle at Saratoga, New York on August the 4th, 1973. And if you look closely, you see that number 3, that's Secretariat over in the background. So apparently what happened was Secretariat had won the Triple Crown in June. He went to Chicago and won. So he came on back to Saratoga and said, well, I'll just do this and settle down. Well, when he got to Saratoga, the horse Onion, who was groomed by my grandfather, actually won the race. And there's a story of how Onion beat the winner of the Triple Crown by Teresa Guerrero. And it was written in an online magazine called The Guardian on Saturday, August the 1st, 2015. And I want to thank my Jones cousins, Winnie Wallace and her brother, Joe Booz, are the nephews of my grandfather. Their mother and my grandfather were siblings. And Joe sent me, Winnie contacted Joe, and Joe sent me his pictures and quite a few others that made us feel very, very excited and very proud to see what our grandfather had accomplished, even in that race. So it's just a joy to get that good news. Now we come to my maternal great-grandparents. My maternal grandmother, Louise's mother, was Emma Louise Barry. She was the daughter of Ben Quarren that we mentioned from the Blackwell Farm. And she was married to Jacob Lee. And Jacob Lee worked at the Warren Green Hotel. And I'll talk a little more about that later. Then on the left, we have my grandfather Howard's mother, Bertha Anderson, and his father, William Lee Jones. And the story I get from the Jones family is that Lee was born in 1883, and he traveled a lot. And apparently, when people harassed him, particularly about racial kinds of matters, he didn't back off. And he died, or he's presumed to have died, but no one knows what happened to him. So they're thinking that maybe he encountered some kind of racial situation and didn't survive. But we have more research to find out what happened to my great-grandfather. Okay, getting back to Jake Lee, he was a porter at the Warren Green Hotel in Warrenton. And I'm printing an excerpt from a book called Her Name Was Willis Warfield by Edwina H. Wilson, the life story of Mrs. Ernest Simpson, that was written in 1936. And on page 75, there is Wallace Spencer had no servants at the Warren Green Hotel, but Jake, the grizzled old colored porter, could not do enough for her. Jake used to wash her dog, Sandy. And I remember hearing stories from my Aunt Callie that he really enjoyed working at the Warren Green, that he'd been there for many years. And as a matter of fact, quite a few other men from the Hayti and Warrenton African-American communities did work at the Warren Green Hotel. And my Aunt Callie said that apparently Wallace Warfield was very fond of her father. And she had heard some stories about that. So I thought it'd be interesting to show that. And also, I have, and I could not find it, a little clipping that I got from the Forkia Democrat, which said that colored man dies and it mentions my Uncle Jake. And just said, this colored man named Jake Lee worked at the Warren Green Hotel, was survived by Emma Lee and so many children. But just a small, when I saw colored man dies, I'm thinking, well, is he the only colored man who died? But maybe that's the way they used to announce that. And of course, on the left, we see again my great-grandmother, Emma Barrett. And here's a picture of the children of my maternal great-grandparents, William and Bertha Jones. And the photo shows 9 of their 12 children. And there are a couple who are not shown, and a couple who didn't survive beyond far beyond birth. And here we have the children of Jacob Lee and Emma Berry. And what's interesting on this is that Jacob and Emma had their children, their oldest daughter and their youngest daughter were the only one who got married. That's my grandmother, Louise, and Callie, Margaret Callie Bonner. Many people know her as Callie. Margaret Callie D. Washington. And Aunt Callie used to dance in the Silas Green show. I don't know if many people who are on here remember Silas Green, but there was a tent show that was organized in Georgia in the South. And it traveled all throughout the South doing minstrel and like vaudeville kinds of things. And they would come to Virginia, to Warrenton, as a matter of fact. And my Aunt Callie became acquainted with Edward Washington, and they married and had my cousin Elaine. That's the Bunburys. And here I have a list of my known paternal second grandparents on both sides, my known paternal third great grandparents on both sides, and my known maternal and paternal fourth great grandparents. And Celia Taylor is mentioned here. She was born sometime between 1782 and 1789. She would be my oldest known ancestor on my father's side. And she also was on the Blackwell farm. And this is my maternal third great grandfather and mother. Louis Hicks Bourne of Baltimore, Maryland, and his family. And I have some other information here about that. I think. Yeah. So anyway, the children of Louis and Margaret Bourne are listed here. And again, I want to thank Tiffany Green, and I want to thank Florence Teen Bourne and Delma Bourne Perrin, who supplied so much information that I don't even have time to tell about the Bourne family. But they were a very prominent family in Calvert County. Ulysses Grant Bourne was a physician, and he attended a college in Raleigh, North Carolina, and got his license to practice in Maryland because he was Black and he wasn't permitted to practice at Frederick Memorial Hospital, where he set up his practice. But he did establish a practice for himself where he accepted both white and Black people. And while he was there, he established a local chapter of the NAACP in Maryland, the Negro Medical Society. And he and another friend founded the only hospital that served Blacks at the time. So if you go to the Frederick Memorial Hospital, you'll see a bust that gives a tribute to Ulysses Sr. And there's also a portrait that was unveiled of him some time ago. Now he had a son who was a doctor and he was in practice with him. He had a daughter, Blanche, who was a public health administrator for 40 years. And I almost met her. She passed away in 2019, at the age of 102. And Ulysses, there was John Franklin. He had a son whose name was James Franklin Bourne. And he was a prominent attorney and got a law degree from Howard. And then he went on to become a judge. And he was appointed by Spurl Agnew as the first African-American to serve as chairman of the Maryland's Workman's Comp Board. And he became a district court judge for Prince George's County, Maryland. And in 1972, he died suddenly from a massive heart attack. And in recognition of his contributions to the field of law and to the courts, there was formed the J. Franklin Bourne Bar Association in 1977, which is very, very active now, and they offer scholarships. And then one more thing about the Bournes, I have other images, but we just don't have time. Thomas William is a direct ancestor of the actress and singer, Toni Braxton. So I come to learn that she's one of my cousins, about 56, somewhere down there. She's in the family. So I'm just humbled, I'm really truly, to have learned all of this information, not only about my mother's people, especially about her ancestors, but also about those who are here in Fort Care at the Blackwell Farm. And I'm sure that both of my parents would have been very, very pleased to have come to learn this information that's here. So at this point, I'll just close my mouth, Karen, and say to any of my relatives that if you would like a copy of this PowerPoint slide, just get into contact with me and I'll try to get it to you in some way. So thank you again, Karen, for having me. And I want to take the moment before we go to thank all of those who have supported these genealogy and events about genealogy and Black history. It's truly, truly been enriching and enlightening to me and to us here at AAHA Fort Care. And Karen, thank you so much for selecting me to do this. I never would have volunteered. No way. I don't see myself as a speaker. So I thank you so much.
Oh, you're quite welcome, Christine. I am going to just quickly check the chat box. Angela saying, great presentation, love the photos.
Okay.
Barbara Newman is asking, did you say your mother and brother both passed in the same year?
Yes.
Okay. And someone else is saying, this is wonderful. Deb Ward is saying, thank you so much, Christine. Excellent information. Carolyn Bland, great presentation, very informative. Thank you so much. Alexis Murray, to everyone, thank you, Auntie. I love hearing you speak about our family. Barbara Newman, thank you for the information, very informative. Thank you, Chris, Sister Chris. Very good, Christine. Bob, to everyone, thanks. A lot of emojis and things of that nature. And I can't tell you enough how much I enjoyed this. I love
Claire.
seeing family tell their own stories because that's where it's at.
It is. Thank you.
Peoples of your history and to be able to share it.
Thank you. Thank you. And thanks everyone for joining us.
Joseph Roby wants to know, I lost connection for a short time. How was Howard White connected to the horse that won against Secretariat? Wonderful job, Christine. Thanks for hosting, Karen.
Actually,
Howard Jones, he made a mistake.
Actually,
Okay.
Howard Jones was the man who groomed Onion, which was the horse that won
Right.
the race. He
Okay.
was a groomer. He had trained some horses, but this particular horse, I don't think they realized its potential. But,
Mhm.
yeah, but he groomed him. So Karen, would you like to close us out, or do you have anything else?
Yes, I will close at this point. Asking everyone to remember June the 17th in Warrenton on Main Street. There will be vendors, there will be speakers, there will be music from 5 until 8, I believe, that day, as we celebrate and look back at Juneteenth. Once again, we will be here on Tuesdays and Wednesdays from 10 to 3. We thank you, Christine, from the bottom of our hearts, and we look forward to more programming and welcoming people to come by, visit us, share your family history. We'd love to be holders of your information as your backup. So I'm going to say goodbye to everyone and thank you for joining in.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.